Hello and welcome back to another out-of-spec detailing video here from Clear Detailing in Northern Colorado. Today we have two German SUVs that we're going to put head-to-head in a build quality comparison. We have the newly refreshed Audi Q8 E-Tron and the EQE 500 SUV. These two are very interesting within their price brackets, where they sit in the EV market, and we're going to be putting them head to head, talking panel gaps, fit and finish, but really focusing, I think, on the biggest point: interior quality, fit and finish of materials, and how everything's put together. So welcome back, and let's jump into it. So today I have my friend and colleague Max that runs our Out of Spec Guide channel with me today. He's going to be helping me along with this video, not only filming, but I want his opinions and impressions on both of these two cars. So we have actually already done the EQE SUV, but the AMG variant of the build quality analysis, I'll leave in the link in the description below, or you can click it up in the banner up top here. And I was very impressed with the AMG variant of the EQE, really nicely put together, but there's definitely a few things that you're gonna see when compared to the Q8 e-tron that this may fall slightly short. So I wanna break this video out into a couple of parts. I really wanna focus on the exterior fit and finish of both of these examples of the cars first off, but I think the main section, like I talked about, is gonna be really diving into the interiors. Now, what's very interesting about both of these cars is the price. And Max, why don't you tell us the price of both of these cars before we get started?
Sure. So both of these cars, being German, of course, have tons of options and trims and variants, but this Audi we're looking at, it's close to maxed out. It's the Prestige, not the Launch Edition, but we're looking at 91.5 grand total, with it being the Prestige and having a few options added onto it, like the black optics package. Then we get to the EQE 500 SUV. EQE 500 automatically is like the basically highest end version of this without going into that spicy AMG that you looked at, Coleton. This one has a few options added on, like the air suspension, which makes it comparable to the Audi, but it's more expensive. It's 98 grand.
Wow. That is, I mean, seriously, at a mid-size SUV level, quite a bit of change. And what's really interesting with these cars is basically this e-tron, in my impression from driving it and being around it, is really not that much different from the OG fat e-tron we've seen that launched in 2019 model year. So we'll definitely talk a lot about that on the inside. Now, just aesthetically, Max, what do you think here? Because I personally think just on the exterior, the e-tron definitely gives that feel of luxury, where this, to me, being its E-Class, definitely start to feel a little bit more cheapness, if you will. You look at the plastic cladding here on the sides, fake vents up front, whereas the e-tron is all painted. So I think that's an interesting fact to start out with. So the EQE is really, actually what I'm trying to say here is these cars are really interesting. And why I say that is the naming structure on this particular car. So with Audi, the higher the number, the more premium, the more like bells and whistles you get with particular cars. And this being their Q8 e-tron is now basically the top of the line, where this is Mercedes EQE, not the full S-Class territory. So I personally think the naming structure on this is a little odd, because I do think Audi needs a higher end trim, like a Q7 e-tron, which would be a 3-row big SUV, but the 8 is smaller than that. So weird stuff going on with naming structure here. I also hate the name of the EQE and EQS, and we have 3-letter abbreviations of everything. So tricky to figure out. But let's just start walking around quickly around the EQE and see how the fit and finish looks. Of course, my first complaint with this, all of this plastic cladding here, it doesn't look super premium, I would say, and just aesthetically overall. I don't know what it is about this car, but it just looks meh. Max, what do you think?
I kind of agree with you that I'm not as huge of a fan of the profile of this as I am with the e-tron, which I think does look a little bit like a Q8. You can also get the e-tron in Sportback styling for those who like the coupe SUVs.
True.
I don't think you or I are the biggest fans of that, but some people do like that. The Mercedes, you're stuck with this blob for better or worse. I think it looks better than the sedans, and I think that's the prevailing opinion. People like the SUV proportions better. Nonetheless, it's not particularly inspiring. It doesn't fill me with any kind of emotion. It's just there. And to add on to what you said, elements like this plastic trim just to me make this look like a very pedestrian, albeit of course nice, but you know, mid-spec luxury SUV you'd see in your neighborhood. It doesn't scream special to me the way an EQS I know can, just because that one has such more presence to it. It feels and looks more expensive.
Sure, 100% agree. I don't know what it is. It's the maybe jelly bean style, the bulbous front end of this car just doesn't strike me as, I don't look at this thing and go, man, this thing's $98,000. Like, not at all. Now, I will say the EQE AMG having some of these plastic portions painted more like the E-Tron and the black optic areas up here where all of this trim is all blacked out, to me looked a lot more premium. So I think it is slightly based on trim. When I look at this car, in my personal opinion, my initial thought is like, this is a $70,000 to $80,000 car, especially the EV market right now. Man, pricing is crazy on all of these. But I will say, lots of positives here with build quality and fit and finish. And this EQE is actually made in the States, correct, Max?
Yep, this is made in their Tuscaloosa plant in Alabama.
Yeah, so I have seen good things. I think interior is my biggest negative, but let's just quickly walk around here. Starting here, looking at all of these panel gaps, fit and finish here. Now these are both press cars, so keep that in mind. They should be gone through, but everything looking really, really tight here. All nice gapping around here, nice seals. All the doors are very nicely aligned. To be honest with you, I've walked around both these cars and they really look pretty darn good. In all honesty, nearly perfect as far as exterior fit and finish. Let's come around here to the back here, Max. And again, more of this plastic cladding you're seeing all down here. This to me just gives very cheap vibes to a car that is almost touching 100 grand. And again, you can spec this particular EQE 500 over 100 grand if you are speccing this thing out to the absolute max, touching on basically a base EQS, which is just wild to me. So lots of interesting things going on here. I do think it's a nice sleek rear end. Love the light bar here. Again, everything back here, I would say, just from a build quality perspective, looks nearly flawless. And you would kind of expect that for paying 100 grand, but man, have we seen on this channel, that is not true for all manufacturers. Moving around here to the side, I would say my biggest complaint with this darn car, door handles. And the car is probably locked right now.
Let's get the keys.
Even though the key is sitting 2 feet away.
Yep, the keys have to be very close, and they're this proximity system. They pop out like that.
Yeah, so I do like how they pop out a lot quieter, substantially quieter than Model S. When Model S door handles come out, these things are like just this huge, huge loud noise. What I hate about these is the feel. So you open these and it gives you this weird fake mechanical pop. And as you can see, it doesn't really move. And then like, what is going on with this door handle? I don't know. Personally, to me, this is not the experience I want to have getting into a $98,000 car. And interesting to note here, no soft closed doors, which the Q8 E-Tron definitely does have. So overall on this car, I don't want to spend too much on the exterior of the vehicle because we have already done the EQE. I think this one, very well built, same as the EQE AMG. Let's focus more here on the E-Tron. Now, largely this car basically just got a facelift since 2019. New front fascia, new rear fascia, but honestly, the car looks nearly identical, which I think, in my impression, is one of the biggest drawbacks of it. Now, I will say, this is a striking car. Immediately looking at this car, you have black optic pack, which I think looks 10 times better than over here on the EQE. You also have all of this trim painted, which in my impression just looks way better. Max, I'd like you to come up here to the front and notice the lack of the cheap textured plastic that the E-Tron has versus the EQE. Just in my impression, this car looks substantially more premium from the exterior, and you just get that road presence of this car. And I also like on the E-Tron that this car doesn't scream electric. I think 9 times out of 10, a normal person would walk up to this and go, wow, that's a really nice Audi, and not necessarily think, oh, this is bleeding edge technology of being an electric car. This to me definitely screams more EV. What do you think, Max?
I agree. The futuristic look of the EQE is, meant to look more coherent with Mercedes EQ lineup. That said, I think most buyers of these badges want the car to look like an Audi or Mercedes, not an EQ, whatever that is, right?
Yep.
And the Audi absolutely looks like, a Q8 Audi in some ways. It's well proportioned. I think it's handsome. I agree with you. I really like the black optics package, but I would contend that with this specific one, I don't like this aero wheel finish. I just think these look kind of cheap compared to the EQE we were just looking at with this aero finish. As far as aero wheels go, I would rather have this like perforated kind of interesting design. That's just me subjectively. Sure. But I agree with you absolutely. The under the radar, it's not really an EV. It's not trying to look like an EV. It just looks like a nice luxury SUV aspect of the e-tron. It's there.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point that you're bringing up is Audi has always, in my impression, had this very stealthy nature to the car. They're very subtle. You see these cars in gray, white, and black, and that's like almost it. Now, there are some people who get other colors, but look back there. This is an S8 and nearly the same exact color as a Q8 e-tron here, black optic pack. Like, that's just something you see as a gray, white, or black Audi. But overall, I think the new styling changes are nice. To me, I don't think it's dramatically different. And again, we'll see inside, not dramatically different. So a light facelift here, which I think is good. But let's just kind of walk around this car, Max, and spend a little bit more time on fit and finish, because Audi has always been one of those manufacturers that really cares about this type of stuff. So hood alignment here. Look how perfect and precise all of this is. Just absolutely streamlined, exactly how it should be. You get the impression that they actually, when they build these cars, they go around with little meters here and basically align all of these panels perfectly together. And you're not seeing things like a Model X where the door's hanging up or, the door handles don't match. That's not what you buy these cars for, and I think that's a really interesting point. All of this plastic cladding here fits absolutely perfect. If I do remember right, on the EQE AMG, some of these painted plastic areas were definitely sticking out and doing this weird wonky thing. Model Ys I see in here a lot have huge issues with this plastic area. This looks absolutely flawless. Charge port here, slightly different upgrade here with the little indicator button, which is quite cool. I think the car is maybe dead or not.
It is locked.
It is locked here. Okay, so let's unlock it. Nice charge port operation here. Now, one thing I'm gonna say, and I say this about all cars, I personally think that having over-engineered charge ports is one of the dumbest things ever. I am just waiting for the day that this thing stops working and your dead car, you cannot charge. The EQE has an interesting charge port over here. It feels mechanical, but it easily opens, and it's gonna be locked here, Max, but let me unlock it. What is wrong with a normal charge port like that?
Dead simple, dead reliable. It's funny you mentioned over-engineering on the Audi too, because that one has the option not just to have the charge port on that side, Coleton, it has an additional J1772 for home charging on the passenger side.
And that was an $1,800 option, I believe, on the build sheet.
It does come, to be fair, with a higher spec 19 kilowatt onboard charger. So for people who have like a really nice high amp setup at home or want a level 2 charge that way, I think for Europe this is more relevant. That's super nice. But imagine, everything you complained about this, it's doubly true. It's over-engineered on both sides. They're both actuated. They're both motorized. I think it's impressive, but I agree with you. A component like that should just be as dead simple as possible. It's not here.
Yeah, and I don't really understand why necessarily in EVs specifically, we have to make charge port doors cool. Like in normal gasoline vehicles, it's just a normal port that is either locked with a key fob or unlocked with a key fob, and it opens up. In my impression, it doesn't need to be special. This to me is something that, now I haven't seen this or heard about it, but over time these components will wear. The OG e-tron being a 2019, how does this charge port open after 10,000 cycles, 20,000 cycles, whatever it may be, because you are actually using charge ports more than a gasoline vehicle. You bring your e-tron home, you plug it in, you go to work, you plug it in. open, close, multiple times a day, where you're doing it maybe once, maybe twice a week in a normal gas car. So just my impression there. The nice thing here on the e-tron that I love, when you get in immediately, proper door handles, and you just immediately start feeling that premium feel. Soft closing doors here. But this actuation versus the EQE over here, night and day difference. And that's really what I like about the e-tron here. All of these panel gaps, fit and finish here, it's flawless, and that's how it should be. You look at the whole rocker panel down here, everything is perfectly and absolutely lined up. And to be honest, this build quality video on the exterior really is, both of these cars are really, really well put together. But the biggest difference is inside. So let's first jump in the EQE and talk about a lot of negatives in here, and then jump into the Q8 e-tron here, where not a lot has changed. Jumping into the EQE interior now, and what do we have here, Max? A failed door handle. This is something we see all the time while we're testing these vehicles. You'll notice the back one is presented and this one is not. Now it does present. Again, just to me, that initial interaction with the vehicle jumping inside, I think somebody's gonna grab that door handle that is maybe cross-shopping a Q8 e-tron and go, what in the heck is going on with this door handle? Personally, I hate it. I think it's a huge, huge miss. Now, interior of the EQE, really futuristic, really interesting use of materials, where they place these materials. And let's just jump into starting here on this door panel. Now, I really like this material that Mercedes is using. I cannot quite explain. You have to go kind of look at it and feel it. It looks like a leather that is probably more of a synthetic leather, but it also looks slightly suede at the same time, which is really, really interesting. And a lot of, just love it with the accented stitching here. You're getting this copper tone with, of course, the nice ambient lighting here. Looks really good. Then you get down to this material. And this is gonna be the same in the Q8, but I really don't like this huge, large grain textured leather material that a lot of manufacturers are using. I really like the idea of a high grain, high finish leather that I believe like the Q8 has on the interior. This just to me screams cheap and plastic. Now aesthetically, I think this door panel looks really nice. You of course have your speakers here, a nice like aluminum finish. It looks very, very premium. This to me all looks good. The negative is, once you start touching things, that's when it falls apart. And I want to mention this because I've seen videos of people in the past. They are just like grabbing onto things and shaking them. And you go, okay, what is the purpose of that? Is it just to bash the company? Now, what happens with this when you're driving down the road, you're going over some undulations, you're turning, going over speed bumps and things like that, you start hearing the car creak and rattle and do some weird stuff. And that's because of areas like this. So Max, I'm gonna have you pull your mic in here and just listen to how all of this stuff, all of these touch points, all these areas, they click and just not super nice materials here. This actually feels pretty good, which I believe to be not metal. This is probably a plastic piece coated with aluminum here, very similar to the door or these seat switches here, where these are really interesting. And one thing I love about Mercedes is, me being a one-handed person, you have your seat adjustment here instead of by the side of the seat. The weird thing with these is they have no movement in them. So they're kind of like a haptic area here, and really feel odd. You can't really tell if you're moving it. So not a huge love there. I don't like the use of the gloss black in high touch point areas. If you're changing your seat, switching from you or your partner's seat, I really don't like this implementation of a lot of gloss black. And it's really interesting because the interior doesn't have a ton of gloss black. You have it here and the center console and of course the screens. But I think areas like this could be slightly nicer, and I'll show you in the e-tron what a nice implementation of that actually looks like. But moving into the seats here, Max, one of my biggest gripes with the Mercedes EQ cars as of late is the use of white carpets. I don't know who decided that having white carpets in a family SUV they are going to be in and out of in the winter time, they are going to have dogs or kids in the back seat. Who made this decision? Look down here by the seat rail down there, Max, and you can see that carpet is already completely stained. We do, of course, have blue carpets in here that go over the top of it as floor mats, but I really think just put a black carpet or even a navy blue carpet to match areas like this in there and give people the option to have that. It just seems like it would make such more sense to me. But moving inside here on the EQE, this is a very, very nice place to be. It feels futuristic. Now, this particular car does not have the full hyper screen, and in my opinion, and a lot of the people I believe out of spec think this looks nicer. It just looks more simple and gives you these lots of different tones and textures to look at on the inside. So we've got a nice wood grain dash here with all the Mercedes logos on it, a nice simple screen in here. And of course, one of the things that I'm gonna also complain about being white, steering wheel. If you guys have ever seen photos of the ID4 launch edition, the first spec that came out with the white steering wheels, and see how they look 2 years later, absolutely heinous. They're so gross. And these are something you're gonna have to clean every couple of days, maybe every week. It's gonna be more use, more abuse on this because you're cleaning it more often. So I really wish Mercedes would give you the option to either have, you know, like white seats and door panels, or with black carpets and a black steering wheel, or just not have this at all. I don't know. It just, to me, feels really weird. Now, steering wheel, very, very large steering wheel. It does feel very nice, very premium though. Now we have haptic buttons here and they all have this nice feedback even when the car is shut off and asleep right now. You do have some swiping controls here on the using your MMI here and all of these operations. So I think it feels really nice. An area that I often talk about as other touch points that you're interacting with on a daily basis is your stocks. A lot of companies, well, I say one company, Tesla, is going away from stocks. I personally think it's a huge miss. It's nice to have this gear selector, and it's nice to have blinkers instead of doing one of these operations while you're driving down the road at 80, 85 miles an hour. So these feel completely fine. Here on the back of the steering wheel, nice clicky regen paddles. This controls either strong recuperation or minimalize it at most. So Max, let me or I guess just tell me what your overall thoughts so far on the interior are.
I agree with you that it has this presence. It's nice. It feels, I think, more tech forward and futuristic than something like the E-Tron does, which we'll get into in a minute here. And, you know, I can't speak to you as much on expertise of the durability of these materials, but I think the reason they do it is, wow, does it make an impression? With obviously, I think all the Mercedes press cars, EQ we've had, have white interiors like this. It impresses journalists. It impresses people getting in the car, your passengers. Of course, if you look at the areas like the white carpet, you're going to see the stains and stuff. But I think just from a at least, like, let's say, lease perspective, you're buying the car new, man, it looks good day one.
It sure does. And you know, like white seats, obviously, I think Tesla really changed the game, especially in the EV industry with using these really bright white materials. And I think a lot of people are going into that. Now, just me sitting in this car versus the Q8, it feels more airy, which is interesting because I am normally big into black headliners, but when you have black headliner, when you have a white headliner, white steering wheel, white carpets, white seats, it does feel brighter. It does feel more premium. And then you get in there and you feel like you're more kind of tucked in a cockpit where this feels a lot more open. So I think, of course, pros and cons to that. I think material wear over time, we're going to see these steering wheels be a massive problem for people and look really, really bad. And I think there's probably a lot of people that are going to walk into this and go, maybe they like a lighter interior, but they're just going to go, I can't do it because of the steering wheel. And if I were purchasing an EQE, I would not select this color option because of the steering wheel. Now, of course, you could probably retrofit it with the black interior and get a black steering wheel, but it should be an option.
Yeah, I agree. It should be an option. I do want to second the point you made. It is so reflective, light, and airy in here. We'll get into this in the Audi e-tron. The panoramic sunroof in this Mercedes is substantially larger than the one you get in the e-tron. Overall, you're getting way more light in this cabin, and because of the white surfaces, you're just getting more of it reflected.
Absolutely, 100%. So I think my opinion of the EQE, the interior looks phenomenal. But again, you start getting to these touch points here and you start hearing these weird creaks and rattles. Max, come around to the other side and let's bring the microphone kind of up to these areas. And again, when you're driving these, nobody's sitting here doing this, but like the noise this is making, the problem with this is when you're going over speed bumps, getting the chassis kind of moving around, you hear all of this stuff around the car and it starts to get really, really annoying. So like areas like this, everything is just clicky. It's just not very nice. Like, listen to this. So again, every time you're moving, you're hearing this crack. You're hearing it from the rear. You're hearing it from the door panel. It's just really not a premium feeling experience. Not something I expect from Mercedes, to be honest, at $98,000. Now, I will tell you, I'm surprised by this, but the E-Tron has some of this as well. And it's areas, again, that you're touching often like this in the E-Tron. But overall, I think the interior is nice in this. I think it's a really interesting compromise in use of materials. Areas like this, though, I absolutely hate this. This looks like it's out of a $20,000 car. You have this very weird area of storage here. Basically, this cup holder comes out and looks like it costs all of 25 cents, even though this is probably the most over-engineered part I've ever seen. So this clips in and you put a drink down here and boom, it spins around. The reason being to have more storage space in here. This to me feels absolutely terrible in my opinion. So putting that back in there, you can hear all of that clicky, very plasticky, very cheap feeling stuff. Not something I really expect out of a $98,000 car. A nice actuation there, but it just doesn't have the heft and weight to it. So very plasticky in certain areas here. Armrests here being that they're white. I think these will also wear over time. I'd like to see a black option here. So maybe a black steering wheel, black armrests here. Plenty of storage space in here and really nice actuation. Very similar to how Rivian is now doing their center console. But yeah, seats overall, Max, I think these seats are super comfy. I would say the E-Tron seats are way comfier though.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious to kind of get what the experience and your thoughts are in the E-Tron. These seats look nice. They are comfy. They don't particularly feel bolstered or supportive to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like it's a good driving position. One thing that Kyle and I always talk about is sitting low in the car. I feel like I can sit low, like I'm slightly looking over the hood here. I hate cars when you're sitting like this and just feel like you're driving a skyscraper. I think it's really interesting with some of these cars how low you can get the seats down, and I'm glad to see that here. So let's hop in the back seat and talk a little bit about materials, fit and finish back there. But I would say everything looks like it is put together well here, Max. I would just say once you start touching things around here and hearing it while you're driving is where this car, in my impression, really falls apart, especially at the asking price. So jumping in the back seat here, and it is very, may I say, plain, Max. It doesn't like scream. And again, this isn't the EQS, but like this back seat is so plain. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's like the lack of any sort of climate in this area. Now I do understand that's an option with the fragrance that you get rear seat.
That's on Pinnacle. Because this is an exclusive, that explains a lot of the minimalism here. This is where they kind of decontent the, mid and entry level trims. Even though this is the best powertrain, Mercedes still has all of those trim levels.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of odd, to be honest. I mean, like, this back seat really feels no different to me than like our ID4. Like, it's just a back seat. At this price point, I personally think like it should be slightly nicer. You need screens like this, and I'm sure you're going to see what we're talking a lot more in the Q8 e-tron. Door panels over here, all these materials up here basically feel the same. We have the same cheaper plastics down here as the front, very scratchy. You still do retain the nice Burmester sound system here, all cut out. This looks nice, but yeah, I don't know. It's fine. Again, you start touching these things, go to grab the handle, like you just hear all this clicky plastic nature to this car, and I really, really don't like that. So lastly, before we jump over to the Q8, let's jump to the back seat here. And let's quickly talk about actuation here of how you get into the trunk. So we have this really cool Mercedes logo here. that you press. The nice thing about that is they hide the backup camera in there, so it's always clean. That's something that a lot of customers of mine, they'll be driving through rain and they're like, I can't even see out the back because my camera is completely covered in water spots or filth or dirt or grime. Now again, whoever decided to make a white rear trunk area, just why? Like, absolutely why? Now, I understand here we have a black carpet mat, but you're going to be throwing stuff in here. Now, I don't think you're putting like mulch and rocks and things like that back here, but there's a lot of people with dogs, with kids, getting groceries, like having white back here in high contact areas that may be holding dirty things. Maybe you put a golf bag back here. Like, I don't understand this concept of using white other than it makes the car feel more airy, but I don't think having black mats and like a black steering wheel would really change the overall feel of that. So overall, I think the EQE built very well, but I think compared to the E-Tron, you're gonna see a lot of really interesting differences. This may look and feel slightly more futuristic, but is it worth, what is it, $6,000 more than the Q8 E-Tron? So jumping immediately out of the EQE, coming into the Q8 E-Tron here, I immediately get that initial feel of that German quality, that heft, that door handle. Just to me, if you park these cars just like we have and you are cross shopping these, you walk up to that EQE, you initially get that feel of that very plasticky opening, and then you start touching things and you're like, huh, that's really odd. So really like the heft. That's really what Audi's known for and why their cars are so amazing. Now, I will say, we drove both of these cars back to back, and one of the things the E-Tron just absolutely kills the EQE in is noise. My friend Kyle that runs the Out of Spec Review channel always says this about E-Trons. They're literally like a bank vault. They are so quiet. The heft in the doors, when you shut this door, you just get a wham, a nice perfect slam. These also, again, like I said, have soft closed doors as well, whereas the more expensive EQE doesn't. The interesting thing, anytime I drive an E-Tron, anytime, I turn down the music and I just sit in absolute silence. The ride is completely supple in this. You don't hear a creak, you don't hear a rattle, nothing. This thing, completely opposite. So Max and I drove these over to the shop here. I drove the Q8 first, he drove the EQE, and then we swapped. Huge difference in my impression, jumping out of the Q8 into the EQE, the noise, the tire noise, the wind noise, and all of the creaks and rattles as you're going over little undulations in the road. What's your impression, Max?
Agree with you. The Audi is sealed, but maybe we'll get into this in the interior and cockpit experience. Feels maybe more claustrophobic, but man, is everything screwed together well. The Mercedes having all these extra elements, like stuff going on, it just feels like there's more loose points, things that can rattle around, and I absolutely agree with you that I heard more of that driving this versus the E-Tron.
Yeah, and I think, maybe if we didn't switch cars, you'd be like, wow, this EQE feels really nice just hopping into it. You hear a few creaks and rattles here. It's not the end of the world, but after you drive this thing, you're like, oh my gosh, like this is a totally different level. So just jumping inside here, this car to me looks absolutely identical to a 2019. Little to no difference. We do have a new seat color option here with orange piping. This used to be the Kronos edition on the old E-Tron variant. I do like this interior, it looks really nice. But when you hop in this car, you definitely get this feeling of a sporty luxury SUV where I feel like the EQE is just trying to be luxurious, even though this EQE is the faster one here. So interesting stuff there. Again, these two are not the super fast ones. We have an AMG of the EQE and an S8, SQ8 E-Tron on this. So interesting stuff there. Max, I just want you to come in and let's just talk about this door panel here. So same plastic or feeling up here, but this is weird because this isn't leather. This is all plastic. It is soft touch, but it's got this wide open grain. To me, this looks quite bad. I really wish they would utilize this material up here. Maybe if it was black, it would be really nice. Somewhat similar to the dash, that really fine grain Audi leather. That's what I'm talking about. Max, come in here and look at how much more premium this leather looks than that wide open grain like the EQE looked like up here. So interesting stuff there. I would say this area for me should be a little bit more premium, especially at $90,000. I would actually say my Model 3 looks better up here in this section because it has more of that leathery material, even though it's vegan leather. So nice accents here though with all of the aluminum here. Very nice ambient lighting. I always love Alcantara. Some people hate it. I really like the material, especially when it's in an area that's not a high touch point area. I talk about this a lot. Alcantara is very, very hard to clean. I have a lot of Porsche customers who have Alcantara steering wheels. An absolute nightmare to maintain. So really like this, gives it nice soft touch areas. Feels really good. Again, I just want you to notice though, the lack of gloss black in this particular area. All these high touch points areas. These look completely fine. I think this looks about the same, if not just as nice, and especially over time when all of that piano black gets scratched up in the EQE, this is gonna look nicer. You know, Alyssa has a E-Tron that she's had for years, a lighter interior color like this, and it has worn perfectly, whereas something, again, like that EQE, gonna get scratched up, you hear all those creaks and rattles, you get nothing of that here. All you hear is absolute heft and weight. Now, I will say, Max, if I remember right, in the older E-Trons that were prestige variant, this material down here used to be leather wrapped, and I don't understand why it's not. It's the same material up here. This is one of those areas that needs to be leather wrapped because you get it kicked when people get in and out of the car, and it creates scuffs and things like that. So interesting. I could be totally wrong on that, but I believe that used to be leather wrapped, and I think that should be a little bit nicer, especially at 90 grand.
I think you're right about that. There's also a few other, seems like cost-cutting moves or material changes.
Yeah.
For instance, small things. The paddle shifters for the recuperation regen control on this are plastic. They were metal in the old one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. They were that aluminum basically like this, and they're now just a very cheap textured black. But the weird thing about the E-Tron to me is this car does not scream top-notch Audi. Like if they're gonna badge this as a Q8, it needs to be higher level. I just wanna quickly show you this S8 that I'm working on. This to me, Max, come around the other side here, is what an 8 Series Audi needs to look like. This is what I'm talking about. All these soft touch leathers here, all the way down the door. Really high quality materials in this. This feels completely different than the Q8. Now I understand there is a price point variation there, but this is really what I expect out of the E-Tron, and also at the price point, I'm very surprised they didn't go that extra mile, especially with the name. Personally, like I said before, the Q8 badge to me does really not make sense on how they've named this car, because we have the Q4 E-Tron. I know we have the Q5, which is the Sportback variant. This to me should be a Q6, and then save the Q8 for a bigger, maybe 3-row SUV of the Q7 in an E-Tron form. So coming inside here, let's talk about seat materials. First off, this material feels 10 times better than the EQE does. Really like the nice, again, fine grain leather that Audi is using. I do want to note though, this car is a press car. Look at how dirty and crinkled and cracked and all of this bolster is getting. Now, this car has, I believe, 2,700 miles on it, but that's why I think a lot of these manufacturers like Rivian, like Tesla, are moving to synthetic materials that, in my impression, wear better. They look just as nice, and they are, yes, technically better for the environment. Not a piece that I personally care about, but cleaning them, feeling them, they just wear a heck of a lot better. And I think this is a perfect example of that. Now, jumping into the E-Tron here, this thing, just in my impression, still, even though it is basically unchanged from a 2019, feels way more sporty, I would say, than the Mercedes. You just have this kind of cockpit feel in here. The window seems a lot narrower. You, of course, have a black headliner here, but it just looks, I don't know, it looks more simple. And I think it's an interesting thing what Audi has done with a lot of their cars to not make their electric cars feel necessarily electric. That's why my wife actually went with an ID4 over something like a Model Y, to where you still get these natural feelings of, you can have your grandma drive this car and she can go to the store and do everything just as normal, instead of having this whole weird electric vehicle experience. Max, what are your thoughts on the interior?
Yeah, well, let me join you on the other side, but I'll just say off the bat here that yes, the interior feels in some ways simpler, in some ways plainer. I'll agree with you that the interior feels in some ways simpler, in some ways plainer, which I think can be a good thing for familiarity with, anyone getting into this. People who've used the Audi brand will look at the MMI in a moment here. It's all the same, whereas the MBUX, the software, and the touch points in the Mercedes are trying so hard to impress you. This is trying to be classic Volkswagen Group, familiar, nothing out of the ordinary, very utilitarian.
Yep, totally agree. And I think this is such a nice interior. So again, looking here, you have white areas on the seats, or lighter gray, and black carpets. That's how it needs to be. You also have just a very nice leather dash here. Again, I'm very surprised Audi didn't put this material, this really high-end grain material, over there on the door panels. I just personally think it would feel so much nicer and give it really that 8 series of Audi feeling in it. I'm also noticing, okay, this is a very different material here. In Alyssa's E-Tron, this is leather wrapped, I believe, in this area, because she's got wood, but this is now like a textured plastic. So I'm feeling more of those cost-cutting areas in different ways here. Now, again, I think this interior feels nice. This thing is just the quietest on the road. I love the ride in the E-Tron. I love how you just turn the music down and it is just silence. Like, it's so good. So good. Now, moving down here, center console area. This has always been an odd implementation of a gear selector here. Again, we have still a start stop button, which I don't love, but you basically pull this back into drive, go up for reverse, and kind of a half one for neutral with your park button there on the side. Feels completely fine. I think the use of this is to be able to rest your arm here and type on the screen, or use your climate. As I open this up, this is basically 100% unchanged from what it used to be. This is basically the same system you find in like a Lamborghini Urus, which of course parts sharing with Audi Volkswagen Group is really, really interesting. But overall, I mean, everything looks good, but it's not bleeding edge. To me, when you're paying for a new Q8 e-tron, you're buying a car with essentially the same technology, slightly different battery pack and things like that, but from 2019.
I would say, Colton, they have upgraded the MMI. It's more responsive. It's a little bit less buggy. So functionally, you're absolutely right. The experience is similar. However, they have heard frustrations from people complaining the old e-tron was a little bit slow, a little bit buggy.
Sure.
So this is a little more refined, but yes, same kind of direction.
But overall, I mean, like the screens, the way everything's laid out, they may have new hardware in this to make it slightly snappier. Everything looks completely the same. You get out of this car into Alyssa's e-tron, absolutely feels identical, and that's the one thing with this e-tron, where it's priced at. I don't know what has happened to the car market, Max, but we cannot skip the fact that you can buy like a 2019 Prestige e-tron, same trim as this, for around $30,000 right now, a third of the cost. Now, albeit you don't have as much range, you don't have the bigger battery pack that this has, you will have slightly degraded batteries, but like, why not just buy 3 of those and have one for your partner, one for your kid, and one for yourself, and then, you're at the same price? I don't know. That's just my opinion. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, no, to touch on that briefly, I call it the double depreciation effect, right? You get the typical depreciation you expect of a luxury or a premium car, and depreciation of the EV technology, which doesn't bode well for here, because we've just been talking about how similar this is to the last one.
Yeah.
I predict in 3 or 4 years, values of these are not going to hold up amazingly.
No, not at all. I mean, I really think you're going to drive this car off the lot, and like, I don't want to just say, but I think you're losing a substantial amount of money. And that, I think, is something you need to take into consideration, because from my impression, what I see as a detailer is a lot of people who are buying vehicles like this are not keeping these for 10 years. They're swapping them out every 3 years, getting the latest, greatest one. But this, to me, feels absolutely unchanged. You could get into a used one. Yes, it may have some more wear and tear on it, but like overall, there's really no difference. Like I think we needed to see more of interior materials improve rather than be like slightly cheaper in certain areas. Now, overall, I don't think this interior is necessarily cheap, but you have areas like this, and similar to the Mercedes, I just want you to put your microphone down here, Max. You can hear we've got cracks and creaks and things like that in this car as well, which I can't say the same about the old E-Tron. It's just, again, areas like this, you're not going to be grabbing onto this, but anytime you're going down here, you may touch it and hear that, and it's like, God, at $90,000, is that really what you want? Yeah, I mean, the E-Tron feels very nice. I've always enjoyed the E-Tron. I just like, on paper, this car to me is very hard to understand. It's very expensive. It charges pretty well. It doesn't have a high peak charging rate, but it charges like a monster, just like plateau effect of charging here. But it's just like, on paper, it's not necessarily fast, doesn't have huge range, but you're buying an Audi. And I think that's one experience that you get in this versus the EQE, is just that bank vault, absolute quiet, premium feeling car.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's that experiential difference. There's such different personalities. This is so much more immersive. Some might, as a negative, say claustrophobic, but it is cool. I like it. It speaks to my personality. However, I think the Mercedes will seem a lot more comfortable to people who aren't into this Audi kind of aesthetic.
Sure. Yeah. And I think Audi and Mercedes customers are very different, and you kind of see that throughout, you know, cars on the road. It seems like Audi is almost like this younger brand, if I get that impression of like, the cars just feel sportier, even though they're still luxurious. Whereas the Mercedes, to me, just really feel luxurious. Now I do understand they make AMG variants with crazy like drifting sideways V8s just screaming out the rear end, but from like their normal everyday cars, I just kind of get that impression that the Audi is just about build quality. It's about being quiet, refined, things like that. And the Mercedes is just like flashy Miami nightclub inside. You have that bright white interior, white steering wheel. So yeah, interesting stuff. Max, let's just quickly hop into the back seat here and see what's going on back there. Great, so let's look in the back seat here and just see how everything feels. Now again, fine grain leather back here. Now immediately, Max, what I'm noticing is legroom. So I'm behind myself. I'm a big dude. Like, there's no question about that. I am very tight back here, where the EQE has much more space. So it seems like the Q8 prioritizes a bigger trunk, whereas the EQE prioritizes more space in the rear legroom. So I think that is something of interest there. Again, this being a Q8 to me should be substantially bigger. I don't know, that's just my impression. And even the gasoline variant of the Q8, SQ8, RSQ8 feels very same size of this. And I made the comment to Max earlier, this car does not feel substantially bigger to me than like our ID4. And that's kind of interesting, I think. But back here, again, materials feel very similar to up front, same plastic areas. We do have rear shades, which I really like to see. And we do have a nice climate control back here, which I think is a very nice haptic feedback here. This all works really nicely. Rear heated seats, very snappy responses here. Exactly what you expect from the Germans. But definitely headroom, you start to feel definitely that more claustrophobic feeling. The glass doesn't go as far back, but yeah, really nice back seat, I would say. Love Audi's materials. They make some great leather in the industry. Yeah, it feels perfectly fine back here. Do I personally feel like this car feels $90,000? I don't know, because here's what I'm thinking is like Rivian R1S, and we haven't brought this up, is a competitor with these on price. It's a way bigger vehicle. So to me, like, if I'm choosing between these, I'm gonna go R1S all day. But it is a bigger vehicle. It's harder to maneuver, but you get an extra row. You get a very different experience, how that thing is so off-road focused, but so daily driving focused. But one point I will say is, do I think that Rivian has the luxury nailed to where these two are really compelled in? I'm not sure. This just gives you I don't know, refinement. I'm not saying that as Rivian's not refined, but I definitely think it's an interesting thing to think about. Whereas like, yeah, you can just get an R1S instead of basically a 6-year-old E-Tron that's new. So that to me is kind of an interesting point. Let's check out the rear trunk space and then we'll finish this one up. So popping back here again, beautiful light bar back here and nice pop open actuation. So really high loading profile here I'm noticing, Max. Is this one not on air suspension?
This one is, but it's on the lower setting, so it's height adjustable.
So here's what's weird, and they took this away as their load height remover, or load height dump here. So there used to be a button over here to where you could dump the rear end to load stuff in. So again, more cost-cutting things going on there. I believe the price has literally gone up on the Q8 versus the old E-Trons, because I don't ever really remember seeing E-Trons in the 90s.
It's roughly the same. To be honest, Colton, this one being at 90, it's so close to fully loaded. I think the sweet spot for this is not much more than 80 grand. And like on your point with R1S and stuff, like yes, it's not the best value relative, like from a feature and content perspective to the startup competitors. But man, compared to the Mercedes, considering that Mercedes we were in was 7 grand more expensive, this feels every bit as luxury as I would want.
Absolutely. And of course, my big thing here, black carpets. I don't know why this is so hard. And to me, this just looks nicer instead of this bright white thing that you are gonna see literally every speck of dirt in the back of the EQE. So Max, I don't know about you, but if I were only shopping Q8 e-tron, EQE 500, gotta give it to the e-tron. This thing just, to me, feels such more refinement to it. All of the exterior fit and finish, the materials they use on the outside, especially without all of that cheap plastic, this thing looks completely different to the EQE in my impression. That really stealth, under the radar Audi. I just think Audi still nails it with this car. I just think it needs more refresh, especially on the inside. I really have little to no complaints with the exterior of this vehicle. Really nice size car, very sleek, very Audi. But yeah, I have to give this one to the e-tron. I think this thing is really awesome. Max, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with you. The e-tron personally is where I would lean just because of its practical, sporty nature. The EQE, I think, is giving a different kind of futuristic vibe. It's absolutely there for buyers. I do like the flashy tech-forward nature of it. It's just not as much as the Audi, considering that it's more expensive from a real world cost perspective. So for me, it's going to be, yes, e-tron as well. But both of these really are a class of luxury apart from something like a Model Y, which you would hope so for the price, but it's nice to see that's backed up in the build quality. Yeah, definitely. And just touching on that point of Tesla, you can't ignore the fact that you can now get a Model X cheaper than either of these two cars, take advantage of the tax credit, have better charging network, basically a roughly the same size battery, but like, I don't know, I don't think people are necessarily cross-shopping an X and an e-tron, which I think some people will, and it's hard to argue against. Yeah, it really is. For spending, okay, $10,000 more for an e-tron, not considering tax credit on that, I mean, that's a hard valuation. And then you consider on top of that, you can get an R1S that can do all of this, load more people in the car, really go off-road, be a very comfortable, unique, startup company. But that's, again, something you're gonna have to deal with, is the startup nature of it. Now, I will say some of the stuff with manufacturers like Audi taking it in for service has been very interesting as new techs learn the electrical components of these cars, where Rivian is like, okay, yeah, we understand that. Tesla is like, yeah, we understand that. So a little different stuff going on there. If you want your normal brick and mortar dealership, buy an Audi, buy a Mercedes. If you're like very future forward, highest tech EV, you buy a Tesla, buy a Rivian. So it's very interesting between these two. Yep, absolutely agree. But I think that's a great place to end it, Colton. Definitely. Thank you guys so much for watching another out of spec detailing video. We'll see you in the next one very, very soon. Bye-bye.